Hi, it's Cheryl here. This video is about shadows. There are two main shadows which I'm going to talk about. One is the cast shadow and one is the form shadows. And why including shadows in your work not only makes your paintings and your drawings much more interesting, but by following shadows and by mapping around the shadows, you can describe the volume, you can describe the form of the object that you are drawing or painting, which makes it a lot easier. Video 2. In the shadow box, I've got white paper, so we've got white, we've got white, and we've also got 3 white little ramekins here that I have stacked on each other because I'm trying to give you the look of a cylinder here. In my studio, I have light sources right in front of me over here, so there are multiple lights on. And it's hard to often see the shadows or to see the form shadows on the form because we have so many lights on. You can see here that we have multiple lights because we have multiple shadows. I'm going to turn the lights out and I'm going to show you what it looks like with a single strong light source. Lights out. I have got a single source light up here. You can see how it's coming in here. It's illuminating this side of my face. This side of my face is falling into shadow. And we have a line up here, which is my hair, which is casting a shadow across my forehead. So the light comes down in straight lines. It is hitting this side of the cylinder. And then you can see this form shadow line, which is coming down through here because the cylinder itself is blocking the light. Remember that light always travels in straight lines. You can see on the other side that we have reflected light. The light's coming down, bouncing off this white paper, and it is reflecting here on the other side, just here. So we almost have like a core shadow, which is running down the core just here. And it's also called a form shadow, and you can see that it's a core shadow. Over here on the other side, we can see the cast shadow because it has cast the shadow. I've put a few extra shapes, objects into the box. We have this an interesting shaped little vase, which has got this spiral pattern here on the side, and you can see the form shadow running down its form, and you can see the reflected light over here. I put this cone shell here also, and you can see where the light is coming from and where it is falling into shadow, and you can see the cast shadow over here. The same thing with this coffee cup, and you can see the shape of the handle. As the coffee cup is blocking the light, we've got this really interesting, really nice shadow coming down here onto this bottom plane. And it's nice to see this really dark shadow here. This is often called a core shadow. This here is the core shadow here. It's running down the core. It's also a form shadow. And we can see how the light is coming in here. So light will behave differently to the different sort of shape that you've got. And it's going to be much easier to start in a grayscale or using white on white. When you start to have objects that have colour, such as oranges or bananas or apples, often it becomes a little bit more confusing because the local colour of the object has changed. Here it is white, but when the local colour of the object becomes like an orange, it's really easy to get confused. So if you're really looking for these shadows and for this value change going from light to dark, start to squint down or get your glasses off and stop using your glasses. So if you start to squint down, you'll be able to see what is light, what is dark, and then map your shadows. Draw around your shadows. So include this shadow here in your composition. Include them in your composition. Actually work out the shapes of the shadows. Draw around them. And a lot of these cast shadows here have very, very sharp lines. They've got hard edges. And as they go away from the object, they become a little bit more fuzzy. In some bananas, into the shadow box like this, I want you to think of these bananas as being a long cylinder that has been curved. Always think about the simple, basic geometric shape. So the bananas are in here. We can see the cast shadows, and we can see in here how we've got this really interesting shadow pattern, here. We know that the light is coming in here, and we can see inside here that we have some form shadows on here. Sometimes if you take a photograph of your still life here, you can actually change it into NOR, get it into the grayscale so that you can see what is dark, what is light. And remember to always draw around these shadows and include them in your work. Drawing is really hard, and painting is even harder because you have different sorts of edges, plus you have colour to deal with. So when you start to draw and you're sitting down, stop naming objects as I can see a finger, or I can see an eye, or I can see lips, and start to see these objects as shapes. So I can see a cylinder, I can see a triangle, I can see a circle, I can see a hemisphere. And also try to see them in terms of just what is light, what is dark. Constantly say what is light, what is dark, what is a simple shape. So that when you have some sort of a complex shape, maybe as this hydrangea, first of all, it first looks like it's really complex. But imagine that this head is just a hemisphere, so that it is half of a sphere. So it's just half. So if it is light on one side, this other side here is going to fall into shadow. So this whole thing will behave just like a hemisphere. The same thing with this chrysanthemum, which is almost a sphere. You'll have a light side, you will have a dark side. Now I'll show you some of my students' work. We work a lot with really simple shapes. This one here was the hydrangea. We've got the dark side, we've got the light side here. Lollipops, we have a shadow, and the shadow can act as a compositional element. I love to join up my shadows that I have a dark pathway to follow through a painting. This one here as oranges, here dark shadows, highlight. So simple shapes are a really good way to paint, and they're also really easy to find. They're in your kitchen, around the house. I go to life drawing pretty much weekly, and we're in a hall, and the hall is lit with just banks of fluorescent lights. And the problem is that you cannot see the model. You cannot see the form of the model because you can't see any shadows. And because there's no shadows, it is really difficult, or I find it really difficult, to navigate the human form, and especially something like a back, which has got really very sort of like subtle areas that cave in, and they go like this really softly. So what I do is that I try to imagine the model as in the simplest forms as possible. So when there is an arm, I imagine this as a cylinder. I can imagine that there is a light coming from the top, so it'll be light. I know that it's going to fall into darkness down here. And I only think in two values. All I think about is what is light, what is dark. And here are a few examples of my drawings. All I'm thinking about is what is light, what is dark. I'm not thinking about lips. I'm not thinking about complicated shadow patterns or tonal patterns. I'm hoping to do more of these videos, and I'm hoping that you're enjoying learning about art. Bye for now.